After the massive success of the first Diablo game, Blizzard had one single grand goal in mind: to make the greatest sequel to a video game ever made. Okay, let's be real here, they just wanted to make more money. But what they did create was a sequel that is lauded as not just an almost perfect sequel to an already beloved game, but also one of the greatest video games of all time. Over 20 years later, Blizzard has decided that they need even more money and something to feed the ravenous fans while Diablo 4 smoldered in development hell. And since the
you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones, right?
Incident didn't work out so well, why not just remaster the fan favorite? For someone who hasn't played the original Diablo 2, this is the perfect opportunity to experience a more digestible version of classic I missed out on. So today is finally the day I, and all of you who clicked on this video, go to hell. Sorry to all Christians, I don't make the rules. Welcome to the Backlog project, where we play through a gigantic backlog of games and you get to choose which one will be covered next. Just head down to the description of the video to take part in our weekly poll and pick your favorite. Diablo wasn't really heavy on story. You just created your character, talked to a few people, and started slaying the legions of hell. But this game is different. Or at least it wanted to be. When the first game was set solely in the town of Tristram and its catacombs, Diablo 2 has your created hero follow the trail of the so-called Dark Wanderer, a mysterious figure leaving destruction in his wake. This wanderer is actually the hero of the first game, who in the final cutscene of Diablo stuck the Lord of Hell's soul shard that contains the essence of Diablo and started the whole mess in his own body in an attempt to contain the primeval. I say attempt, because they failed horrendously and are now being controlled by Diablo, who uses his new body to wander across Sanctuary and resurrect his two brothers, Mephisto and Baal. Since these two have been conveniently sealed far away from each other, the Dark Wanderer, aka Diablo, has a lot of walking to do, and so do we, because we're hot on his heels on this diabolical scavenger hunt. And here comes my problem with the game's plot. While we do meet some important characters, both old and new, and have our fair share of things to take care of, we mostly just follow in Diablo's footsteps in a futile attempt to catch up to him. This results in not a lot of stuff actually, happening, but already having happened, and we're just there to help the locals clean up the mess Diablo made in each of the 3 acts. It also doesn't help that the game goes to great lengths to have a lot of dialogue, but most of it feeling like useless fluff because you can't ever really do much with all the knowledge you pick up because it's all in the past anyways. Act 2 is a bit of an outlier here because it does offer some interesting plot points that unravel as you're there, but it's not enough to make this game's narrative anything more than serviceable, with a lot of potential wasted on good but ultimately anecdotal background lore instead of an involving storyline. From what I can tell, the biggest focus of Resurrected, that's the witty title the remaster got, was put on improving the graphics of our 20-plus-year-old game. And let me just say that they absolutely nailed every aspect of it, at least from my perspective, who hasn't played the original and can only look at comparisons online. I have found the odd person unsatisfied with how the visuals turned out, but their arguments were far from making sense, so I'll just go by the assumption that I'm not the only one who enjoys the new coat of paint this game got, and sorely needed. It's easy to dismiss the graphical fidelity of a top-down RPG like Diablo, but that doesn't make the much better textures and effects any less of a sight to behold. If it wasn't for the UI and the purposefully still stiff animations, you wouldn't be able to tell how old this game was. What impresses me the most is how close everything looks to the original. They modernized it without losing the identity of what people loved about Diablo 2 for years, which is a lot harder to do than just slapping on a shiny new graphics code and not care for the intricacies of retro game visuals. But the coolest thing is how they did it. More akin to a mod than a new game, Resurrected basically overlays the original visuals with an indistinguishable filter of new graphics, allowing the player to instantly toggle between the legacy and Resurrected graphics, should they wish to do so. You know what wasn't touched? The soundtrack. You also know why. because there was absolutely no need to. Diablo 2's soundtrack builds on what made the first game's score so special and gives us more. I criticized Diablo for having only 8 tracks when I reviewed it because despite them being great, it was just not nearly enough variety to stay interesting in a 10+ hour game. Well, the beloved sequel boasts 27 tracks of grotesque goodness, and despite also being a much longer game, doesn't get stale in this regard because you switch between areas often. No more being stuck in one level for 4 hours straight. The music, again composed by Blizzard legend Matt Ullman, takes heavy inspiration from its predecessor. Shadowy, almost ritualistic sounds accompanied by Ullman's signature guitar play form a horror-esque symphony that is at the same time comforting and foreboding, perfectly befitting the world of Sanctuary. Oh, and yes, you can faintly hear the cries of tormented souls in the background of some of the later level themes, just like in the first Diablo. Lovely, innit? You know, I made a big mistake. I went into this game blind. Everybody I talked to before playing it said I should use a guide, but I thought I was better than that. I'm not. Diablo 2 is archaic. There's really no other way to say it. Well, maybe there is, and my vocabulary is just limited, but still. Before you actually start the game, you are tasked with creating a character, which in and of itself is rather simple given that you have absolutely no say in how they will look or even their gender. Classes are gender locked, and every character of the same class looks exactly the same. Feels a bit weird, but sure, I've seen worse. The actual meat of the character creation comes from choosing which class you want to play as, because that will heavily influence how you will play this game. Want something in your face? Go with the typical warrior archetype barbarian, the lightning fast assassin, or a more support focused paladin. Fancy that juicy ranged combat? A sorceress for your typical elemental magic, and the slightly less conventional death magic focused necromancer are at your disposal, with the Amazon a specialist in physical ranged weaponry like bows and javelins, rounding out the selection of the rearguard roles in this game. And then there's what I chose, the Druid, and this was my biggest mistake. The Druid is a hybrid character that can, depending on your build, be played as a ranged nature caster, a supporting pet class, relying on summoned nature spirits and animals, or become an animal himself by transforming into a werewolf or bear. Sounds pretty cool, right? Well, it is, but it's also apparently very easy to mess up your build and generally not very good for solo play, so I was in for a bad time with my little werewolf dude. It doesn't help that the game severely limits your ability to experiment with builds by locking it behind doing a specific quest, a quest that is only available to each character once per difficulty, so if you happen to mess up your character and have already used your precious respec charge, have fun finishing a whole playthrough of the game before you get to reset again when you get into New Game Plus. Nevertheless, I decided on being a druid, and I didn't even learn that my choice might not have been very smart until I was talking to a friend about how hard of a time I was having with the game after about 20 hours of playing. I'm also not one to give up midway through a game, so I slowly made my way through the different areas of Sanctuary, fighting hordes of monsters, undead, and demons along the way by pressing A and holding the button, and doing the same thing again for the next group of enemies while using potions whenever my health dropped low. Yeah, so it turns out Werewolf Druid isn't exactly the most engaging thing to play in this game, and I only really had the transformation skill, which comes with a basic attack and some passives to make me stay in werewolf form longer and deal more or take less damage. It wasn't until pretty late in my playthrough, around Act 4 out of 5, that I got rabies and turned into a walking disease dispenser. Different to the horrible sickness in real life, rabies in Diablo 2 is actually a lot of fun, and the same as in real life, a highly potent way of killing things. What it did was basically make all of my hits apply a very lethal poison that automatically spread to every enemy around the infected. With the amount of enemies the game likes to throw at you, this spreads faster than COVID at a 2020 swinger party, and combined with the fact that werewolves regenerate a portion of their dealt damage as HP made me nearly unkillable. Still, I effectively only pressed one button throughout most of my playthrough, And from what I can tell by googling some more builds, most classes in this game don't really go for a very diverse gameplay, because it's usually much stronger to focus your skill points into maxing out a few select talents than to get as many skills as you can. The general gameplay loop is still very similar to before. You leave town to explore the randomly generated overworld, find dungeons, and complete quests. On your way, you fight tons, and I mean tons, of monsters that range from simple HP sponges to simple HP sponges with annoying abilities. Honestly, the biggest change to the general gameplay feel has nothing to do with more classes, skills, and items. It's the monsters. Pretty much any status effect that you could possibly imagine in an RPG is present and gets thrown at you incessantly, with the sole purpose of the game being to make you give up. It's like Dark Souls. And I don't mean this in the weirdly popular game reviewer way of saying, this game is the Dark Souls of fuck shit town because it's hard, but that it really reminds me of Dark Souls in that it actively puts hurdles in your way because it wants you to feel good once you conquer it. And it succeeds in that, most of the time. This game was not just early in the series, but early in the whole genre. It kinda invented it after all, so it's to be expected that some among the heaps of enemies are duds. For example, there are beetles in Act 2, the desert, that emit lightning in every direction when they are hit. What makes for a decently fun game of Dance Dance Revolution for a ranged character turns into a how fast can the game code deplete your HP challenge for any melee build. Enemies that counter specific playstyles like these exist across the game, and no matter what class you play, you are likely to run into a how the fuck do I properly fight these situations sooner or later. Look, I get the idea here. Diablo is a co-op game first and foremost, so they want you to find others to play with and cover for each other's weaknesses. However, this design philosophy turns solo play, which is still a viable option to enjoy an action RPG, into a drag sometimes. It also doesn't help that Diablo 2 isn't exactly shy with throwing throngs of enemies at you and also reusing enemies and their mechanics in later dungeons. The biggest bust are the bosses though. Not only do they not really have any interesting mechanics that would require you to strategize, they also just plain are not fun to fight. See my fight against Duriel, the boss of Act 2 here? Literally all he does is poison me and occasionally push me back a few meters, making me walk back up to him. The only lethality in Diablo 2's boss fights comes from the fact that A, they have absurd amounts of health, and B, hit harder than a blue shell right in front of the finish line. While you can carry a few more potions than in the first Diablo, you'll still burn through those expeditiously with how you need to spam them to stay alive against the big bads of this game. So how do you beat them? You just teleport to town. I shit you not. This is the play, and I hate that it not only works, but is also widely accepted as a valid strategy to easily beat any boss in the game. Like in the first game, you can buy town portal scrolls that allow you to create a portal back to town, no matter where you are. It also works in boss arenas, so whenever you run out of potions, you just hit that hotkey you saved your portal on, teleport back, buy another inventory full of potions, and resume the fight because the bosses don't even recover HP when you're gone. Add to that the numbingly boring encounter designs, and bosses turn from what should be a highlight into the least exciting part of the game. And before you go into the comments to write a big ass paragraph about how wrong I am because bosses do recover health while you're gone on higher difficulties, and you need to prepare meticulously for a boss fight to take it out in one go. You're right, but I'm talking about normal here. Most people won't have the patience to go to the higher difficulties, so that's what I'm basing this off. Although you should still totally write that comment and help this video conquer the algorithm, and while you're at it, give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you're not yet. With that super sneaky call to action out of the way, let's talk about the meat of any action RPG: loot. Where the first Diablo's items were almost entirely randomly generated, Blizzard decided to put in some hard work for the sequel and create a more satisfying looter experience by not only giving each item in the game a specific range of stats it can roll on, they also made tons of unique items that are always the exact same. While this means no more funny minus 100% damage weapons dropping from bad RNG like in D1, it also means that the gearing process is much more streamlined and gives you specific goals. You don't just spam dungeons over and over again and check for every single drop, since it could be something amazing among all the trash you get. Instead, you know exactly what you're going for and where it can drop, saving you time and sanity. Of course, making a perfect build, or even something close to that, still requires a ton of grinding, which is the cornerstone of an RPG like Diablo, and most people are probably here for the mindless chase of a stronger character anyways. It can get a bit boring due to how basic the actual gameplay is, but it definitely triggers that little spark of happiness in your brain when you finally get that item you've wanted for a long time, so prepare to get addicted to the dopamine. Because enemy groups are much larger in the sequel, you can also expect a lot more items to drop. While this in itself is a good thing, and it's fairly easy to see at a glance which items are actually useful or not, this only further accentuates an issue that Diablo 2's predecessor already had and annoyed me to death. Inventory management. Look, I usually try to stay as objective as I can when reviewing these games, to give you all a decent overview of what the game does well and what it messes up. But I just cannot do that for inventory management systems in video games. I hate it! Especially ones that are as crappy as Diablo 2's. In simple terms, the game gives you a space of tiles that you can place your different items in. There are 4 rows of 10 tiles for a total of 40 inventory slots. Smaller items like scrolls and potions take up 1 slot. Bigger items like weapons and gear can take up to 8. Yep, you heard that right, and your mental math isn't failing you. That means you can carry 5 of the biggest items in the game at once, in a game that gives you an average of 3 to 5 items after each group of enemies. So how do we solve this issue? Well, for one, scrolls can now be stacked, so you don't need a slot for every single one you carry, allowing you to always have some on hand without sacrificing valuable space. Second improvement, the belt is back and still allows you to hold 8 small items, which will most likely be potions for quick access during combat. However, you can now increase the slots your belt offers by wearing higher rarity belts up to a maximum of 16 slots. The game now also has a way of storing items for later use, the stash. It's basically a chest in town that you can put items into and don't have to fear losing them when you die, offering an additional 48 inventory tiles. The stash is a big help in keeping weapons on hand that you might not be able to use yet due to level restrictions, or stuff you want to keep to experiment with your build a bit. While this means that you don't just throw your leftover stuff into town square like in Diablo 1 and make Tristram look like a Christmas tree anymore, your inventory is still very small in comparison to the flood of items you get, forcing you to either skip on valuable loot time and time again, or regularly, as in every 2 minutes, teleport back to town and sell your loot. The inventory problem is only further underlined by a new type of item in Diablo 2, runes. Runes in Diablo 2 are a pretty complex feature, and we'll get into that in a minute, but let me just make my previous sentence make sense and tell you that you get a lot of runes during your playthrough, and even if they only take 1 inventory slot each, they still bloat your stash rapidly by the sheer fact that you don't really want to sell or throw them away because they might become useful in the future. But what do they even do? In essence, runes act a lot like gems or sockets in many modern RPGs. You can find runes off of pretty much any enemy in the game, with harder enemies having a better chance of dropping them. These are then placed in your gear's rune slots. Most items that drop after Act 2 have at least 1 slot, so it's fair to call this system integral to the gearing process of the game. There are a total of 33 runes in Diablo 2, with effects ranging from simple stat increases to making the affected item indestructible. The idea itself is pretty cool, adding a bit of player agency to the gearing process by allowing them to tune their items to their specific needs is fun and can really help you get through the game by utilizing the system well, if only you actually got taught how. Figuring out that runes go into rune sockets isn't really all that hard, and reading the effects off of their tooltips gives you a pretty decent chance of not messing this up. But what if I told you that there's a whole secondary system at play with these runes that many casual players never even come across, let alone learn to properly use? Let me introduce you to the world of Runewords. probably my biggest issue with this game. See, every rune in Diablo 2 has not just a special effect, but also a name, and when you combine specific runes, they can form a rune word. It's not really a word, and usually has nothing to do with how the rune's name sounds, so this is mostly just some neat lore and not actually useful in figuring out the system. However, to form a rune word, you don't just have to put the right runes in the right order into an item, that item also has to, for whatever reason, be gray, and the number of sockets must be equal to the number of runes used in the word. Got one too many sockets on your sword? Well, time to form another one. Once you finally have that coveted perfect item for your preferred rune word, you just put the runes in the right order of course, and you get a slick piece of gear to Diablo all over the place. But how do you know which runes form which word and in what order they have to be placed? With the game featuring 33 runes and items being able to have between 1 and 6 sockets, there are a hell of a lot of potential combinations here. Only 78 of them will work. Well, only might not really be the right word here. That's more than enough completely hidden bonus effects to potentially put on your gear. The best part about this is that runes are gone once you put them into an item. There's no way to get your rune back if you mess up a rune word, and with some runes having drop chances as low as 0.00003% from the last boss of the game no less, you really don't want to lose those. While the system may sound like a convoluted but cool idea for perfectionists, it comes with 3 glaring issues. First of all, the game literally does not tell you about this. I'm pretty thorough with my game, so I tend to talk to NPCs and listen to all their dialogue, and I have never come across anything even vaguely resembling a tutorial on this system. I only learned about it after playing through the game and talking to a friend about it who told me, yeah, if you just used rune words properly, you would have had an easier time. Well, isn't that just dandy? I'll let you guess how people knew about these back when the original game was new and the internet was still much less reliable and widespread. They didn't. Not even the official manual of this game acknowledges the existence of this system. Oh wait, of course the official Bradley Games game guide for Diablo 2 had all the information you need, if you just forked over some more cash to get that juicy info to get the most out of your game. Well played, Blizzard. Well played. The second problem is what I alluded to earlier. The drop rates on these runes are ass. Most of them will have you farm the same boss or dungeon over and 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 over. I get it. Diablo is supposed to be a grindy game. It's part of the charm. But let's be real here, guys and gals. This is just a ridiculous waste of players' time. Who in their right mind would even take such a task upon themselves? Those who really want to pop off because the bonuses these rune words give to your character are insane. This is problem 3 if you hadn't noticed. Chances to auto-cast strong magic for free with every hit? Check. Resistance stats, those are important in this game, increased by amounts not even achievable by normal gear? Check. Up to 400% damage increase? Yeah, right, as if. Check. Wait, what the fuck, really? As if that wasn't messed up enough, you can stack rune words. So not only do you have to go through the whole ordeal once, but for multiple gear slots to build the most utterly overpowered character to ever walk on Sanctuary. Given the amount of effort one would have to put into doing this, what's even the point? This is where Diablo 2's difficulties come into play. With the ability to build such monstrously strong characters, the game had to throw something at players to really gnaw on for long enough to warrant farming all of that stuff. When you finish your playthrough of the game, you can either continue to roam the world in the current difficulty, everything respawns each time you restart the game anyways, even bosses, or decide to start the game again with your current character, but on a higher difficulty. And the game takes this word literally. Going from normal to nightmare, the second of 3 levels will make enemies deal 75% more damage, have stronger magic, Have more random modifiers like lightning, poison, and other fun stuff. Reduce players' resistances by 40%. Reduce the effectiveness of most status effects from players by half. Increase the already massive level size of some dungeons. Make characters lose 5% experience after dying. The only real positive you get from playing on Nightmare is that enemies give you more XP. You still need a ton more than before, so leveling slows down nevertheless, and drop better items. If you somehow manage to get past this difficulty, you are allowed to enter Hell mode, which exacerbates it even further. This disgustingly brutal increase in difficulty is the result of the vicious cycle the game found itself in by making Runewords so powerful. This means not only are you literally required to farm for ages to have a shot at completing the game, many builds are completely unable to do so because they just plain and simple do not have the tools to do it on their own, and the game doesn't really offer enough depth in the combat system to compensate this issue with players' skill. Speaking of completion, if you watched some of my other reviews, you might be aware that I always complete games to give you the best possible overview about everything the game offers. Let's break that rule. When you take a look at the achievement list of Diablo II Resurrected, you might notice a few very similarly looking ones. Beat Hell difficulty with every class. I just told you how much work it is to get a character into proper form to tackle this, and the game wants me to do it 7 times? This one is also great. Reach level 99. Sounds easy enough on paper, but guess how long this takes? The fastest leveling methods I can find clock in at around 100 to 120 hours to get one character to level 99, and that is by abusing the party system to get way more XP than you could get solo. In fact, solo runs are considered fast if they can break the 300-hour mark. And then there's another roadblock in the form of a level 99 hardcore character. For those unfamiliar with these types of games, hardcore is something you can only activate when creating your character, and it changes one thing about the game. If you die, you're dead. You can't play the character anymore. You have to start over from scratch. So this already pretty hard and massively grindy game wants me to beat it 7 times and then take a character on a 100 to 300 hour long, and might I add boring as fuck, grind where all of my progress resets if I die even a single time? Yeah, no thanks. Really, I'm good. Okay guys, I want to be real with you. I didn't have the most amazing time during my playthrough of Diablo II. The simple gameplay, made frustratingly difficult by bad class and build balance, hit or miss enemy design, and an almost obligatory focus on mindless grind to persevere can really suck the life out of you. Throw in a mostly uninteresting storyline and annoying, constant inventory management, and many of you can probably see why this game has a hard time keeping players' attention for the 20 to 30 hours it takes to finish their playthrough. 10 or even 20 times that if one is insane enough to go for completion. And yet, it did. It's hard to describe, but Diablo 2 has a strangely alluring touch to it that makes it very easy to lose yourself in the game despite its flaws. Not rarely have I found myself losing track of time, suddenly staring at a clock showing way past midnight when I just wanted to continue the story a bit after dinner. The beautifully grotesque visuals that have even been, in my opinion, perfectly modernized in this remaster, and a haunting yet intricate and memorable soundtrack work in perfect harmony to give the brain off and kill type gameplay just enough familiarity to make you want to come back again and again. Even with my mixed thoughts during the playthrough, I constantly find myself wanting to go back to the game to try out different classes, builds, and gear. Diablo 2 is video game cocaine, and you should treat yourself to a sample. Just let your friends and family know in case you stop leaving your room due to the addiction swallowing you whole. When we didn't complete Diablo 2 because it has horrendous achievements, we had 32 hours and 21 minutes of total playtime, 5 acts completed, 6,312 health potions used, 13 Runewords used, thanks Google, 7 instant deaths to electro-infused monsters because fuck those things. Hope you enjoyed the video, thank you very much for watching, and remember to always keep that backlog rolling.